Hi guys, this is Ramon Goose, and in this video we're going to be talking about the history of the fuzz face. The story starts with Ivor Arbiter, who in the late 1950s opened a drum shop on Shaftesbury Avenue in London called Drum City. Prior to 1966, Arbiter Electronics owned 3 music shops in the London's West End. One of these music shops, which was located at 22 Rupert Street, was called Sound City, and this was also the birthplace of Sound City amplifiers. Arbiter had been one of the pioneers of distributing US-made guitars in Britain. Because of the debts the UK had with the US, some goods made in the US, including guitars, had been subject to severe import restrictions until the end of the 1950s. Arbiter helped fill this void by importing guitars made in continental Europe, and in particular Germany and Holland. He ferried Dutch-made guitars over to England himself personally, using a van that a friend lent to him. In 1965 to 1966, British companies such as Solar Sound, Wem and Rock started to release fuzz pedals. In late 1966, Arbiter released the Fuzz Face. It was built by the Arbiter Electronics Limited company. The Fuzz Face was available in 1966 from September until November. The 2 transistor circuit is virtually identical to the Mark 1.5 tone bender, and uses a similar circuit pathway to the Vox distortion booster. Therefore, it's very likely that this was a straight copy of a Mark 1.5 tone bender. One clue that the fuzz face was copied from the Mark 1.5 tone bender was the fact that the instruction sheet for the fuzz face states it is a battery-powered tone bending unit. Early black and grey units were branded Arbiter England. The fuzz face appeared in the 1967 Sound City catalogue. The idea for the round enclosure shape came to Ivor Arbiter from looking at a microphone stand. The knobs for eyes, the name label for a smile, and the foot switch for the nose. Some sources state that the Sound City amplifiers and Arbiter effects pedals were made in the back of the Sound City building. Dave Reeves, who founded Highwatt Amps and branded them and sold them to Arbiter as Sound City amps for a short while around 1966, as well as branding them for Macari's Solar Sound brand, may have been involved in the building of these early fuzz faces. There are also other reports of Ivor outsourcing his house-branded products, so it's unclear if the effects pedals were made in-house or outsourced by Arbiter. Okay, let's talk about the construction. Interestingly, the foot switch is a DP-DT type, double pole, double throw, which makes the fuzz face probably the first distortion pedal with true bypass switching. Why Arbiter chose to spend extra shillings on a costlier switch that at the time no one needed is a bit of a mystery. The earliest fuzz faces quickly switched from AC128 to NKT275 germanium transistors. However, here is a quote from Analog Man. You will read on some websites that some original fuzz face pedals used an AC128 transistor. However, I and all my fuzz face guru friends have never seen these in an original fuzz face from the 1960s, and we have seen hundreds of them. The AC128 was, however, found in the grey reissues made in the 90s. Although the fuzz face is virtually identical to Solar Sound's Mark 1.5 tone bender, the main difference is that the fuzz face is biased slightly colder, making it more usable in warm environments. The earliest models were painted red, or light or dark grey hammerite paint. The fuzz face logo was painted in black or white, and the cutout smile said Arbiter England. The circuit consists of 2 transistors, 4 resistors, 3 capacitors and 2 controls. The NKT275 was made by Newmarket Electronics in England, and most people regard this grey can as the magical transistor tone-wise. And this is most likely what Jimi Hendrix had in his early fuzz face pedals. The fuzz face has a low input impedance and thus is very sensitive to the guitar pickup. By rolling the volume knob, the guitar player can decrease the gain of the pedal and get a clean or crunch sound, while still having all the gain when the volume knob is on maximum. For the same reason, fuzz pedals react differently when placed directly after the guitar than when they are after other pedals or after a buffer amplifier. These early Arbiter fuzz faces, which contained germanium transistors, were incredibly inconsistent. Leakage, voltage and temperature fluctuations were a constant issue. Fuzz pedal designers such as Gary Hurst and Roger Mayer would often measure the HFE gain of each unit, accounting for leakage and ideal voltage. and using the appropriate bias resistors, sort through 100 pieces to maybe find 30 choice units which sounded good. Also, many guitarists prefer to use 9-volt batteries that were nearly dead than fresh for a warmer tone. As well as a different choice of transistor for the fuzz face, in this case a Newmarket NKT275, Arbiter went with a 470k volume pot instead of a 100k pot. This actually has a large impact on the sound of the circuit. Simply put, the volume pot is a voltage divider. If the pot is set to 12 o'clock, then a 100k ohm pot places 50k ohm series resistance on the output of the circuit. A 470k ohm pot would place 235k ohm series resistance on the output. The cable plugged into the output jack of the fuzz face and running to the amp will have inevitably internal capacitance. The series resistance of the volume pot in conjunction with the capacitance of the cable forms a high pass filter. The bigger the output resistance, the bigger the high frequency loss. Therefore, the 100k pot results in less high frequency roll-off. The 470k pot results in greater high frequency loss and a darker sounding fuzz. While the Gibson Maestro fuzz pedal cost £30, Arbiter's fuzz face was just £6. Because Arbiter's Sound City shop in London were distributing Fender guitars, Jimi Hendrix quite often hung out in Arbiter's music shop Sound City in London. There he got to know about the fuzz face. The Sound City shop and also Drum City would quite often loan out gear to the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And Jimi's press officer at the time, Tony Garland, would either collect these items personally or get the workers at Sound City and Drum City to deliver them to him. In this photo here you can see Jimi using a fuzz face in November 1966. The photo is from one of 3 or 4 nights the Experience played at the Big Apple in Munich in the second week of November 1966. Bear in mind that Jimi had only arrived in London on the 24th of September 1966. In 1967, after financial troubles, Arbiter Electronics merged with Dallas Musical Limited, forming Dallas Arbiter Limited. This company lasted until the 1980s. J. E. Dallas & Sons was founded by John E. Dallas in 1875 in London. It initially acted as a music publisher and banjo manufacturer. As well as selling drums, the company started expanding in the 1950s and started manufacturing amplifiers and selling guitars under a variety of names including Martin Coletti. The company closed down Carlton Drums in 1967 after years of losses and took over Arbiter Electronics in 1967. Along with it got the Drum City and Sound City stores and all the related distribution business that went with it. This also included the Fender UK distribution. Ivor Arbiter was to stay on and become a board member of Dallas Music. After the Arbiter company fused with Dallas Music Instruments, around 1968 the text was changed to Dallas Arbiter England. The painted logo was later replaced during the Dallas Musical Instruments production period, and these decals are so delicate that the original units from this period often have pretty worn logos. These decals were also used for the in, out, fuzz and volume markings. From around 1969 or 1970, the pedal became available in blue hammerite for the first time. From May until October 1968, a second slightly different sand cast enclosure appeared. The flattened arc at the top of the pedal, in which the jack socket fits, is ever so slightly shorter in length from those from the 67 period. On the inside of the enclosure, a third flattened disc was added in between those already there for the volume and fuzz pointer meters. This additional disc was seemingly to facilitate building of Arbiter's 3-knob treble plus bass face, a booster pedal housed in the same enclosure. Around 1968 and 69, Dallas Arbiter replaced the NKT257 germanium transistors, firstly with the BC108C silicon transistors, and then later the BC183L silicon transistors. Later silicon transistors that were used in the fuzz face circuit were the BC109, 109C, and lastly the BC209C. The silicon transistors were silver coloured at first, and only half the size of its germanium relatives, but pretty soon after, all silicon got the black plastic look that they have today. To hear a fuzz face with silicon transistors in action, check out Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsy live album. One thing to point out was when Hendrix switched to silicon transistors, they created a few problems on stage for him, since they were much more susceptible to receiving AM radio signals, which were then audible through the guitar amplifiers. The original production of the fuzz face finally ended around 1974 and 1975. During the making of this video, I contacted Dennis Cornell. Dennis kindly supplied me with the following information concerning his connection with the fuzz face. To quote Dennis, "One of my duties was to test the fuzz face pedals made in the factory. This must have been in the mid-70s. These pedals were made in several places. I don't know much about their original production, but I can remember Ivor Arbiter telling the story of how he invented the design and used the bottom of a mic stand to fit the circuit board in, and that is how the round shape came about. At first, testing these units was a nightmare. Each unit having different output levels. I seemed to be forever changing transistors to find some kind of common ground. Characteristics of the transistors meant that normal testing by voltage signal and oscilloscopes did not pick up the variations in performance. In fact, I hated the job and dreaded when a production run was requested. However, I soon added to the test procedure a guitar test. In fact, this is the only way to test the unit. I soon discovered a technique of knowing what was good, for example, striking a note and listening to the decay. Poor units would die away quickly and lose the tone. Also, playing high notes due to their less output, the high notes were diminished and more likely to decay faster. Finding a good one was a dream, and the guitar would sustain forever. It must be said that at the time we used AC 128 transistors, but like many amplifier companies, army surplus components. This was end of war stock and there were thousands of components being sold off at silly prices. One problem was the resistors and capacitors were almost all non-common values. Dallas Musical Industries became Arbiter, as the owner of Lee Products died. His son, John Lee, moved to USA. I believe he made the fuzz units over there, as there were only a few more batches made after he left. The company grew and grew, too big for the old building at the south end. So we moved to a massive factory in Shoeburyness. In this factory we did not just make the Sound City range of amplifiers and cabinets, but also the auto-tune drums, Heyman guitars and Vox amplifiers. By this time it was the late 70s. Tom died and Arbiter closed, leaving me out of a job. Arbiter became CBS Arbiter as Ivor imported Fender guitars and amplifiers. I worked for them on a self-employed basis. Shortly after Fender went direct, Arbiter went down. Ivor and his son John died. Dallas Musical Industries made a final batch of fuzz face units in 1976 or 1977, shortly after moving to the United States. The company bought Crest Audio in the 1980s, and although it was operating under that name when it reissued the fuzz face in 1986, the unit still bore the Dallas Arbiter name. Arbiter halted production of the original fuzz face in 1975. The design was reissued by Crest Audio of New Jersey in the late 1970s, and then with the second version in the late 80s. The first reissue to come out during the second half of the 70s was made by Crest Audio in New Jersey, USA. Their model was physically higher than the originals and used the BC109 silicon transistor. The housing was painted thin in a light grey colour that failed to resemble the original Hammerite paint. The smile cut out said Dallas Music or Dallas Arbiter. They sound roughly like a 70s original, but some say they're a little bit too harsh compared to the originals. Towards the end of the 80s, Dave Fox at Crest Audio made a new try, this time with full-page ads in Guitar Player magazine. The production run was painted in an ordinary red or grey colour, no Hammerite paint, and in the smile cutout it said Dallas Arbiter, England, with the text that was printed on a plastic sticker rather than painted on the housing, exactly like today's Dunlop reissues. Once again, the BC109C was used. Okay, I'm now going to read you some of the fuzz face story by Dave Fox of Fox Rocks Electronics, which can also be found on Analog Man's website. I started working for Crest Audio in the fall of 1984. I was 21 years old, and I had the job of QC technician for their mixing console lines. One day I was looking for parts in one of their stock rooms, and I came across a fuzz face. It was blue, nearly 2 inches tall in height, and it said Dallas Music Industries on the mouth. I put a battery in the fuzz face and tried it out. It sounded like crap. I decided to do some research. It turns out that Crest Audio used to be Dallas Music Industries. Dallas Music Industries used to be Dallas Arbiter. I tried messing around with the blue fuzz face again and found that by changing the 8.2K resistor to 6.2K, I was able to get a decent sound out of it. It turns out the fuzz face that I had been checking out was a reissue from 1976. It was a silicon version. It was half an inch taller than the original Fuzz faces, and the transistors were BC109Cs. I thought it would be cool to start making them again. I went to the president and owner of Crest, a wonderful Englishman named John Lee, and presented the idea. He liked it, so we started making them. We tried different colours. We settled on grey, blue and red. We bought a nice supply of BC109Cs, graded them all by gain and matched them up. As I worked at the Fuzz Face booth at the 1987 NAMM show, people kept coming up to me and asking me if my Fuzz Faces was the same thing as what they had at the Dunlop booths. Knowing nothing about what Dunlop was up to, I went to their booth to check it out. It turns out they were making something called the Jimi Hendrix Fuzz. It was black and very similar to the Fuzz Face. I went back and told my boss, John Lee. Next thing I know, he's at the Dunlop booth having a lengthy conversation with Jim Dunlop. To make a long story short, lawyers got involved, and in the end, the lawyers made most of the money. As Crest was in the pro audio business and Dunlop was in the guitar gadget business, as you would expect, John Lee and Jim Dunlop were both good businessmen, and they came to an agreement that Dunlop would manufacture Fuzz Faces with permission from John Lee. As far as money, I'm sure an agreement was made that worked out well for both parties. Crest was in the pro audio business and Dunlop was in the guitar gadget business, so it made the most sense. During Crest's Fuzz Face production period, we made probably around 2,000 of them. Arbiter took large numbers of them and sold them in the UK. There were some slight variations in the style of the aluminium castings. The units had such high gain that we had to start putting shielded wires inside to prevent oscillation. To quote Dave Fox regarding the Crest Audio era Fuzz Faces, and in particular the enclosures, Dave says, "When we started making the Fuzz Faces in 1986, we didn't have the tooling for those tall enclosures. Probably lost in a foundry in England. So I took the remaining blue one that I found in the stockroom and I gutted it. It was used to make a mould, which was then modified to be what the Crest Fuzz Faces were made from. That mould got modified again after the first batch. The entire first run was grey. We did a couple of batches of blue, a couple of batches of red and grey, and then when Dunlop started making them, they stuck with red." Dunlop took over production in 1993 and started to use PNP germanium transistors almost straight away in their first units. These reportedly sound quite bad. Since then, they have been using different brands of germanium transistors, which have been relabeled NKT275. In the late 1990s, Arbiter reissued the pedal. In his own words, Dennis Cornell remembers how he made the last batch of Arbiter Fuzz Faces. Going back to the Arbiter years, it was in the late 90s that then Arbiter Group asked me to remake the Fuzz Face under license for them. The thought of making 1,000 units, and with my connection with the unit, I jumped at it. John Arbiter obtained an early unit and I was asked to copy it. The unit employed AC 128 transistors and the components were mounted on a printed circuit board, just like the units I remembered. Remembering the problem with testing, I decided to look into the problem with transistors and the difference with tone, and after much investigation I decided to add a bias pot. Unfortunately, John was not impressed and insisted it should be as close as possible to the original unit. I managed to source the original carbon resistors, and the capacitors were still being made, although not in the same package. It took some time to make the first 100, as not just the components had to be sourced, but things like casting, the smiley face rubber tread, and even the battery clip had to be made from scratch. There was to be a second run. However, John Arbiter died and it ended there. I did think to make the unit myself and registered the Fuzz Face name. However, Dunlop had the same idea with plenty of money to throw lawyers at, and I had to step aside. Knowing that one of the reasons that John Arbiter relaunched the Fuzz Face was Dunlop using their name in America and also wanted to use the name across the world, I thought I would produce the unit in a different package and use a different name. The unit I make now is called the First Fuzz, because that is just what it is. Still using the same component board and carbon resistors. Guys, thanks for watching this video. If you have any information, don't forget to leave it in the comments section. I'll be doing a video soon about how I use a Fuzz Face pedal in my own music. And also don't forget to subscribe, like and share. This is Ramon Goose signing out. Take care.